Hello and welcome back to Leafin'Green. I am super excited about this first video because I'm going to talk about my favorite species of plant, which is, surprise, surprise, the philodendron. I adore philodendrons. They are a beautiful plant. There are so many varieties. They are so easy to care for, to propagate. They're a great beginner plant, and there's so many varieties that I just can't get enough. Really want to collect them all, but we'll see how we go. So they're just incredibly different as well. So although my partner would argue otherwise. So behind me, I have a silver cloud, which the leaves are just dreamy. And next to me is a Dean McDowell or Pastor-Zanum. And I'll showcase just a few more because, you know, I'm very proud of these guys. So this is a Macaulay's Finale, and just look at the color on that. That's just incredible. And then I've got a Splendid cutting propagating. So just the coloring, the velvetyness, the veining, it's beautiful. Who can forget Glorious? Love a Glorious. And then here's that's a cutting of a Campus Spontaneum that I have propagated. But as you can see, the colors, the shapes, philodendrons really vary. Some crawl, some climb. So let's talk about this amazing plant. So philodendrons are essentially a tropical rainforest plant. So this means that they're a shade plant because there are heaps of trees above, so they only get dappled light. They're not by any means a full sun plant. And there are different types. So some crawl along the ground and others climb up trees. And this is why philodendrons love totem poles. The climbing varieties really need something to climb because in their natural habitat, they would be climbing up and rooting into a tree essentially. And if you have a big yard, you can do this as well. They look absolutely incredible growing off trees. But that's essentially the kind of environment that they come from. It's humid, it's warm, there's only dappled light, it's predominantly shade. And that's how they thrive. So somewhere like Queensland, they do quite well because we've still got the humidity, we've still got the heat. And I find that they do pretty well all year round. If some are struggling through winter, I'll just put them in a greenhouse to up the humidity a little bit more. But for the most part, and especially the established ones, I really don't find a need to do that. In Queensland, they just grow all year round. So I guess let's talk about plant needs. So they need a nice, light, airy mix. So I make up my own potting mix. I use, so I don't actually have a hard and fast recipe. Sometimes I just throw some things together in my storage box and mix it around and go, yep, that looks about the right proportions. But I use usually equal parts orchid bark and potting mix. So let's say maybe 3 scoops potting bark, 3 scoops potting mix, and then 2 scoops perlite, 1 scoop charcoal, because that's going to make a really nice, well draining mix. So they don't like their roots just sitting in wet soil. And I find that if you use straight potting mix, it's just not the right type of mix for pot plants because it just stays really damp. It's not so much an issue in summer, but in winter, your plants just won't dry out if it's straight potting mix. So you need the perlite, you need the charcoal in there to absorb excess moisture, to let it drain. And I mean, philodendrons love that type of mix. I actually use a cheap potting mix. I don't bother with the premiums because I guess the only benefit of a premium potting mix is possibly higher grade materials and higher quality. I haven't found that to be the case too much. It's really just the things that they add in there. So a lot of the premium potting mixes already have fertilizer added, so you won't need to fertilize for X amount of months. And I just find that confusing with how many plants I have. I like to be on my own fertilizing schedule. So I just use the plain potting mix. I think I get like a big bag for like $3, and the plants seem to love it. So they're not complaining. So that's where you start. That's the type of potting mix you'd want. And then with watering, philodendrons like to dry out between watering. I don't know how to describe watering any better than you just give them some water like you normally would any plant, and then stick your finger in the soil and make sure it's quite dry before you water them again. Now in summer, they'll probably dry out pretty quickly, especially if you're using that good, well-draining potting mix. But in winter, it could take quite a bit longer. So you just want to stick your finger in, I say about part way down, because really you want to know if it's still wet where the roots are, because we don't want roots sitting in wet potting mix because they'll rot. So I guess I can't even give you a rule of thumb because it really depends on your climate, your temperatures, how much light your house gets, the humidity levels. All of that impacts how quickly the plant is going to dry out and it's going to need more water. So I always go for underwatering than overwatering, because underwatering is a lot easier to correct than overwatering and root rot. Thankfully, philodendrons are pretty forgiving though, and they're very easy to save because you can just propagate them from a node and grow another plant. But let's avoid having to do that in the first place. So I couldn't even give you a ballpark figure because, as I said, light, temperature, how much airflow you have, all of that's going to matter. But if you just let the soil dry out between waterings, do the finger test or even get a moisture meter. They're not 100% accurate, but I found they're okay. You're onto a winner there in terms of watering. In terms of light, they can deal with some sunlight. So you can also gradually increase their sunblock, a natural sunblock. So if you gradually introduce them to more and more sun, they will become more adapted to the sun. But they're never going to be a full sun plant. You just end up burning their leaves. But you know, a couple hours of morning sun's great. And even better is a really bright, naturally lit room, but without any actual direct sunlight on their leaves through windows or anything like that. If you have a bright, naturally lit room, they are going to love it. They're going to grow quickly, they're going to be healthier. And I mean, worst case scenario, you can always get a grow light if you're not getting high enough amounts of light. So there's always that option too. So they're an indoor plant. Well, you can keep them on the patio, but as long as you remember that they're a shade plant, really any kind of environment where there's shade is going to be okay for them. So they can be outside, out of direct sun. You can keep them inside. If you're in a cold and very dry state where you don't have a lot of humidity, you may need to up the moisture and just get a humidifier to run near them or something like that. But it'll really depend how they're going, whether they're browning or how they're growing, because if they're looking okay, don't try to fix it. They'll be fine. Now, fertilizing. When they're actively growing, so when they're pushing out new leaves, you're going to want to fertilize. And to be completely honest, I am economical with my fertilizer. All I use, and about every 6 weeks, I use Sea Salt Complete Garden Health Treatment. This is not a plant food, so it's not actually a fertilizer. It is a health tonic. It's essentially nutrients for the soil, but not a fertilizer, which is why I mix these nutrients, which I found that plants really love, with Thrive All-Purpose liquid plant food. Now, this is a pretty trusted brand. It's been around for a long time. I think I buy this for like $10 at Bunnings, and it makes up to 150 litres of fertiliser. So, I mean, I've found that they work great. I haven't dabbled in quite expensive fertilisers because, well, I guess if these work, I haven't wanted to change it. And also they leave me more budget for plants, so. But yeah, basically I just follow the instructions on the back. So 1 cap for 9 litres of water, and pop that in there in the watering can, and then same thing, follow the directions on this one, pop that in, give it a good mix, and then water my plants with it. Now, pests. It is inevitable that your philodendrons will have pests at some point. We all hope they don't. We inspect them daily. To be completely honest, I've found philodendrons relatively hardy when it comes to pests. Like things like calathea and alocasia, oh, they attract pests. I find philodendrons to be okay, but when it happens, my go-to is pyrethrum spray. So this is just pyrethrum long life insect spray. There are directions on the pack, so you don't want to, there's something about, yeah, do not pick fruit or vegetables 1 day after spraying. Be mindful of where the runoff is going, and things about rain. You've got to be mindful of rain because you don't want to destroy the environment. But you do want this on your indoor plants. So I just give them a spray as soon as I notice pests, and maybe 3 days later I'll do another spray. After that, that basically sorts it out. But if you've got something a bit more stubborn, like mealybugs that seem to keep coming back, you might need to try something else like neem oil or white oil, and I'll go into my experience with pest treatments in another video. But my go-to is always pyrethrum because it's pretty gentle. You don't need to make sure you've thoroughly washed it off so that the plants don't burn in the sun or anything like that. You just spray it. If they're gone, excellent, spray it again, see how you go. I don't really do it preventatively because I don't like the idea of introducing chemicals. So yeah, usually people with lots of plants like to preventatively spray them all. I don't do that. I just make sure I inspect all of them pretty often, and anything that crops up I treat as it comes up, and I treat the plants near that plant if there is an outbreak. So I think that basically covers philodendron plant care. So we've gone over bright light, not direct light. We want to water them sparingly. We want to have a really nice, loose, free draining mix to pot them up in. We want to fertilize during their growth periods about every 6 weeks. In winter, you might want to hold off depending what state you're in, but in Queensland they keep throwing out leaves, so as long as they're doing that, I fertilize through winter. Pyrethrum spray for any pests that you find on them, and other than that, just enjoy them being pretty. Oh, I hope you've learned something, guys, and I hope for those of you starting to get into plants, you go out and grab some philodendrons because they will spruce up your space. They are stunning. Look at that color. Anyway, bye guys.